John C. Whitcomb, a biography, the theologian who helped launch modern creationism. Few people have had a greater impact on the modern young earth creationist movement than John C. Whitcomb. Although he was primarily a Bible scholar rather than a scientist, his partnership with engineer Henry M. Morris helped create one of the most influential books in 20th century evangelical Christianity and sparked a revival of creationist thought that continues to this day. John Clement Whitcomb was born on June 22, 1924, in Washington, D.C. He grew up during a period when many Christian denominations were wrestling with questions about science, evolution, and biblical interpretation. As a young man, Whitcomb developed a strong commitment to the authority of Scripture, a conviction that would guide his entire career. After serving in the United States military during World War II, Whitcomb pursued higher education. He attended Princeton University, where he earned his undergraduate degree. He later attended Grace Theological Seminary, preparing for a life of ministry, teaching, and scholarship. While studying theology, Whitcomb became interested in the book of Genesis and the biblical account of Noah's flood. At the time, many Christian scholars interpreted the flood as a regional event or accepted geological ages spanning millions of years. Whitcomb was not persuaded by those views. He believed that Genesis described a literal worldwide flood that had dramatically shaped the Earth's surface. This conviction became the subject of his doctoral research. While working on his dissertation, Whitcomb sought assistance from Henry Morris, a hydraulic engineer who shared his belief in a global flood. The collaboration between theologian and scientist would prove historic. In 1961, the two men published The Genesis Flood. The book argued that Noah's flood was a real global catastrophe, that many geological formations traditionally attributed to millions of years could instead be explained by that event. Whitcomb contributed to the theological and biblical foundations, while Morris focused on scientific and geological arguments. The book had an extraordinary impact. It became one of the most influential creationist works of the 20th century and is often credited with launching the modern creation science movement. Before its publication, belief in a young earth and a global flood was relatively fragmented among conservative Christians. Afterward, a growing network of ministries, conferences, schools, and research organizations emerged to defend those views. Unlike Morris, who became widely known through scientific debates and research organizations, Whitcomb focused much of his career on teaching and biblical scholarship. He served for many years as a professor at Grace Theological Seminary, where he taught Old Testament studies and theology. Students remembered him as a careful scholar who emphasized both academic rigor and faithfulness to Scripture. Whitcomb became especially respected within evangelical circles for his defense of biblical inerrancy, the belief that the Bible is completely trustworthy and authoritative in all that it affirms. He argued that compromising the historical accuracy of Genesis could undermine confidence in the rest of Scripture. Over the course of his career, Whitcomb wrote numerous books and commentaries. While creationism remained one of his most visible interests, he also addressed prophecy, theology, biblical history, and Christian living. His writings reflected a lifelong commitment to helping believers understand and defend the Bible. As the creation movement grew during the 1970s, 1980s, and beyond, Whitcomb became a frequent conference speaker. He addressed audiences around the world, encouraging Christians to view Genesis as genuine history rather than symbolism or myth. His calm and scholarly style contrasted with some of the more confrontational public debates that characterized later creationist apologetics. Supporters viewed Whitcomb as a faithful defender of biblical truth and one of the most important theological voices in modern creationism. Critics, including most mainstream scientists and many Christian scholars, disagreed with his conclusions regarding geology, earth history, and biblical interpretation. Nevertheless, even critics acknowledged the significant influence of his work. One of Whitcomb's greatest contributions was providing a theological framework for the creationist movement. While Henry Morris supplied much of the scientific argumentation, Whitcomb helped persuade many Christians that the debate was ultimately about biblical authority and interpretation. John C. Whitcomb continued teaching, writing, and speaking well into his later years. He witnessed the growth of creationist ministries such as Institute for Creation Research and later organizations like Answers in Genesis, all of which were influenced in some way by the ideas presented in the Genesis flood. Whitcomb passed away on February 5, 2020 at the age of 95. By then, he had spent more than 7 decades defending his understanding of Scripture and helping shape one of the most influential movements in modern evangelical Christianity. Today, John C. Whitcomb is remembered as a theologian, educator, author, and pioneer whose work helped revive global interest in biblical creationism. Whether one agrees with his conclusions or not, his role in shaping the modern conversation about Genesis, creation, and Noah's flood remains historically significant.